We would like to welcome you to William Congdon, Painting to the Depths of Reality, a documentary on the action painter rediscovered. Jane MILOSCH is here today to help us discover and understand Bill Congdon. Jane is director of the Provenance Research Initiative, Office of the Undersecretary for History, Art, and Culture at the Smithsonian Institution. She oversees World War II-era Provenance Research Project and other cultural heritage work. And we're extremely grateful for her to be here today to help us understand this fascinating artist. So Jane, I'll give you the floor.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here today, despite the cold because the sun is shining, and especially because it's New York City, where Bill Congdon first discovered his great muse in 1948, the metropolis of New York. This city is a muse, a place of discovery for many people, but especially fertile for artists. It seems more than a coincidence that in 1948, another artist, a writer named Thomas Merton, published his conversion story, The Seven-Story Mountain, which takes place largely in New York. Around the same time, three other converts were publishing their stories. Dorothy Day published her autobiography, The Long Loneliest, in 1952. The same year, Flannery O'Connor published her first novel, Wise Blood. And around the same time, Walker Percy published his work, The Moviegoer. I mentioned these things early on because this is not the crowd of artists which Congdon met when he was in New York, but because he had serious literary interests. These works would not have escaped his notice. Essentially, after the devastation of World War II, many people were asking deep questions and seeking out all kinds of answers. It is also no coincidence that the idea for this presentation today grew out of an exchange between Italians and Americans involved in organizing New York Encounter. This event, modeled after a yearly event in Rimini called Meeting of the Friendship Among Peoples, and also organized by the Catholic lay movement Communion and Liberation, played a vital role in Congdon's rediscovery as an important artist of the 20th century. Italy became Congdon's adopted home from 1951 until his death in 1998. He first lived in Venice, the city that was to become his second muse, then Assisi, and finally the countryside outside of Milan. After nearly 20 years of working in relative isolation, an exhibition of his work, From New York to Calcutta and Beyond, was presented in 1980 at the first meeting in Rimini. This exhibition brought his work back to public attention and led to several other exhibitions in Italy and a few in the US, as well as a major monograph on his work and his life story. Published in 1995, this book includes essays by two prominent American historians and curators, Fred Licht, who had been a curator at the Peggy Guggenheim Museum in Venice, and Peter Seltz, who was, in the late 1950s and 60s, a curator here in New York City at the Museum of Modern Art. In short, you will have an opportunity to see Congdon's work and to hear his own reflections about the meaning of his works and the journey of his life in a documentary film made in the 1990s. Congdon was not only a talented painter, but also highly articulate in describing his ideas and in describing the ideas and energy behind his work. His paintings are like poems in which colors become words and the sprawling energy of his calligraphic lines a kind of universal symbolic language. Since we are all here in New York today, after this presentation, you too can go out and see and experience at least some of the things which moved Congdon to paint New York, to consider whether or how effectively he captured the energy of this diverse and great city. Perhaps some of you have heard of William Congdon before, but I would assume most have not. I first learned about him when I was working in Munich, Germany in the late 1990s for an art publishing house. I was invited to Milan to see a selection of his works in a private collection. I regret that I never had the opportunity to meet him, but his work and his story opened up a number of questions for me. Congdon had, at first, an exceptionally successful career in America, one which lasted nearly 15 years, from the end of World War II until about 1960. He painted and exhibited alongside a group of artists working in New York City who became known as the Abstract Expressionists, also known as the New York School. These painters shared certain principles and an approach to painting and sculpture which elevated the act of making art. And the process was valued as a direct expression of spontaneous emotions and spiritual and physical energies, the reason for and the objective for painting. This approach was called action painting because it emphasized this act of painting, its sequence of movements which became the theme of the picture. At the same time, each artist pursued different artistic concepts and developed their own style and methods. The New York School became the term applied to artists involved in various avant-garde trends which emerged in New York in the late 1940s, such as abstract expressionism or color field painting, and this was actually the first movement in America to reach international renown. Some of the best-known painters of this era include Jackson Pollock for his action and drip paintings, Robert Motherwell, William de Kooning for his I consider almost violent depictions of women which featured harsh colors, aggressive and gestural brushstrokes. He recently had a show here at the Museum of Modern Art, and I don't know how many of you have seen it, but there's some fascinating reviews on that show, particularly by Frances O'Connor, who is a leading scholar on Jackson Pollock. Not all favorable, I must say. During this period in New York, there was a host of painters and sculptors of a very high level of quality and astonishing vitality. New York had become the center of the art world following the close of World War II. Many of these artists, like Congdon, had been impacted by and/or disillusioned by the level of destruction unleashed during the Second World War. Their works became a kind of aggressive response or an escape to the lack of meaning, chaos, and/or destruction which they saw. They were creating a new autonomous reality in their paintings through their actions, not through carefully prolonged studies or recording of a subject. Unlike the Impressionists, who emphasized painting plein air, out of doors, for an intense and direct recording or interpretation of nature, these artists produced their works in their studios, from memory and often within a few frenzied hours. At the same time, these abstract marks were the result of years of study and mark making. They were all highly proficient draftsmen, and in their ability to draw the human figure and capture pictorial space. Congdon, perhaps more than any of the other abstract expressionists, did not obliterate his subject matter beyond recognition. Rather, he created a kind of pictorial synthesis of the places he had seen and experienced with his memory and mark making, first through beautiful sketches, but fully worked out in paintings when he worked in the studio. Sometimes he created these after months after he'd visited a place. The film you're about to see provides you with the basic chronology of his life, but I would like to highlight just a few things. He was born and raised in Providence, Rhode Island, a city steeped in the history and making of art. Some of you have probably heard of the prestigious Rhode Island School of Design. However, he did not choose to study there, but first studied English literature and Spanish at Yale University, with strong interests in the arts, dance, music, theater, and opera. It was not until the end of his studies that he took a painting class under the encouragement of a good friend. He went on to study painting, first with Henry Henshaw in Provincetown, where he gleaned a tremendous understanding of painting atmospheric pictures of sky and water, then at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, and finally with the great sculptor George Demetrios, who taught him to see and render the figure through rapid poses and careful observation. Congdon's mature style as a painter owes much to the tools and techniques which these earlier artists instilled in him. And that's why his works are highly informed abstractions, which are still rooted in naturalistic observation, albeit from memory and sketches done while traveling. His technical skill, together with his imagination, allowed him to break down and model and recreate his subject matter in fragments and in an animated whole. All of his life, Congdon was an inveterate traveler. Since his youth, together with his family, he traveled to Europe on all of the major steamers of the day. When he volunteered to serve in World War II, it was not in support of violence, but as an ambulance driver for the American Field Service. And this took him to North Africa, then to Italy, and finally Germany. He traveled until his health would no longer permit him. and sometimes alone and sometimes in the company of others. He was particularly attracted to great man-made monuments of the world, as well as natural wonders. And he traveled for varying lengths of time to the Mediterranean, Africa, Latin America, and the Far East. This aspect of his biography is not easily separated from his artistic career, and about which he often reflected. Traveling is another way of shaking up the eye, one which renews all the references in the artist's life, and everything is marvelously and dangerously new. After New York, his other great muse became and remained for nearly 12 years the city of Venice. His paintings of Piazza San Marco, St. Mark's Square, with its open expanse, horizontal architecture, and majestic basilica, at first seems to have little in common with the vertical steel skyscrapers of New York City. But in a way, opposites attract. Congdon found a kind of bride or refuge in Venice. The history of these two cities converge in his depictions of the architectural achievements of these two empires. Venice, like New York, has attracted countless artists for centuries. Well, I guess obviously New York not for the same number of centuries as Venice. It was during this time that Congdon also developed a close friendship with the well-known modern art collector Peggy Guggenheim. She wrote about Congdon's work that he was the first artist since Turner to understand the city's mystery, poetry, and passion. While in Venice, he continued to have numerous solo exhibitions at the famous Betty Parsons Gallery here in New York, and nearly every major art museum in the U.S. exhibited and acquired his work. The Metropolitan, MoMA, Whitney, Smithsonian, the Phillips Collection, the Art Institute of Chicago, Detroit, the Carnegie. But few, if any, of these museums have his work on permanent view today, as they do their Pollocks, de Koonings, and Rothkos. In the movie, you will see and hear a bit about Congdon's working methods, but I would also like to comment on them briefly here. Rather than working in oil on canvas with brushes, he chose to work on panel, rigid boards that had flat, smooth surfaces. This is the same surface on which most early Renaissance altar paintings were created, oil on panel. Instead of using canvas and the traditional white gesso as the ground for his painting, he used black. He used a black ground and painted with a spatula, a kind of large palette knife, which traditionally would have been used to mix paints but not to paint. Congdon also treated his easel paintings like sculptures, gouging into the paint or combing into it with some other tool or invention to create dynamic textures and incisions. Like many of the other abstract expressionist painters, he painted in an intense and highly focused period of time, so work could be completed in a day or in one setting. Many of these artists destroyed works, sometimes several months' worth of work, if the work did not meet up to their expectations and standards. Another exceptional aspect of Congdon's work is that with his disappearance from the American and international art scene in the late 1950s, he began to work in relative isolation, devoid of any contact with other contemporary artistic movements. This was not so much by choice, but by destiny. Some unforeseen and yet somehow also anticipated event when one looks back at the evolution of his work. An artist's work, like life, is rarely linear, but there are often traces of the same questions and challenges being posed, but in endlessly new compositions in different circumstances. In 1959, Congdon became Catholic, and this started and upset many of his fellow artists and supporters. This conversion caused a break and a certain crisis in his work. He spent years reevaluating and considering his subject matter, but never left off from the original working methods which he had developed. Instead, he continued to push and develop them even further, perfecting his sense of color, form, and light. In some ways, his break with the American art scene had already begun when he spent most of his time living outside of the U.S. The art world marched on, new movements and ideas were happening in rapid succession in New York, while he more or less permanently settled in Italy. Around that same time, Congdon was made financially independent by a generous and substantial family inheritance, so he no longer needed to sell his work to survive as an artist. At this point, we're going to show the film, and I'll make some conclusions, and then we'll have a little slide presentation. It's hard to follow that. So I just want to repeat the last line that Congdon said, because I found it quite beautiful and a nice way to sum up just a few things. He said, "All my life has been a picture. I see art as a window on life, beyond death, on the mortality of things." When I was asked to reflect upon Congdon's work and life for this presentation, I suggested the title, "Painting to the Depths of Reality," as it seems to sum up Congdon's life's work, his drive, his search, a desire for meaning in something more than a random convergence of things. He wanted answers to the tremendous destruction and suffering he had witnessed during his life, first as an ambulance driver in World War II, then at the liberation of Hitler's death camps, even the squalor of the streets of New York or Calcutta. The dignity of the human being is ever present in his work, even if no figures are visible in his paintings. Congdon pursued a path true to his own experience. He was very knowledgeable about art history and the development of different artistic styles. His work reveals his complex understanding of color, form, and line that is ever evolving and never static. If you visit the Museum of Modern Art today, you can see the works of the artists he admired, from Cézanne to Paul Klee, and the artists he exhibited alongside with. While he shares things in common with the other abstract expressionists, when he left America for Europe to search out foreign subjects and themes, he took the movement with him. He developed an approach and a style of painting that was all his own and is certainly deserving of greater attention. Now that Italian and American scholars are rediscovering and analyzing his work, this opens up all kinds of possibilities for his work to become better known. And I want to count myself among one of those scholars. It's nothing more exciting for an art historian to come across an artist whose work merits greater attention and future exhibitions and better understanding. It's really kind of like discovering a treasure chest. Art history is always in the process of being written and rewritten. In the end, it is not the critics or an art market that will determine the staying power of Congdon's work, but the power of the work itself to connect and resonate with others on a universal and individual level. Great art is enigmatic. It cannot be pinned down, and that's how I see Congdon's work. His conversion to Catholicism adds another fascinating lens through which to consider his work, and within the trajectory of other religious and spiritual art. While it may seem to some a tragedy that his conversion cut him off from the art world, I am thankful this happened, because you see, I believe he continued to paint in a way that was totally authentic, not for an art market, but works with tremendous depth and energy. When Jacques Maritain was invited to write a preface to Congdon's exhibition In My Disc of Gold in 1962, he says, "When I met William Congdon in Paris, what struck me about him was his strangely defenseless candor, a vulnerability to any spiritual arrow, either the arrows of the distress of this world and of the beauty that wounds the senses, or the arrows of the supermundane shores. I felt that astonishing resemblance between the man and his work, which is characteristic of a genuinely great artist." Now I'm going to show you a brief PowerPoint presentation of Congdon's work, roughly in a chronological and thematic sequence, which has been paired with some of his own writings. This was produced by the Foundation for Improving and Understanding the Arts, a foundation dedicated to the care and preservation of Congdon's works, as well as designed to promote events and projects which increase our awareness of the power of art, beauty, and truth in our lives. I just want to say that it's very hard to picture these work because the visceral quality of the paint is lost. I mean, these are incredibly rich, lush, vibrating surfaces. But I'm going to flip through so you can get a more focused view of some of the works and hear some of his thoughts again, kind of expanding on what we just saw in the film. Okay, we need to go back. Can we go back to the first slide? Okay, we'll just, whoops, yeah, here we go. Conceiving the image. I paint with the spatula. I paint with the spatula because I was and I continue to be a sculptor, and as such, I mold matter. This is what I have always been saying. It is a very material explanation, yet there is another one. With my spatula, like a surgeon, I remove the weeds that belong to the life of the world. To free the spirit, it's my freedom that chooses the subject that got hold of my freedom and not my imagination. The image has to be born within us. A painting is born, not made. It is my freedom that chooses the subject. Oh, I'm sorry about that. Go on here. Here you can understand how the image is born before the painting is made, and that painting is a mere obedience to something that already happened. It's the image making a painting of itself. The artist is merely a conduit. The urgent gaze. We create in the grief our own unholiness. In the very instant when the artist sees his entire life in what has burst into him, his eye pierces the world, nails itself to the earth, and shoots forth a seed which will grow until the painting is born. All of life is this reality, that God is today, this one and only instant. New York. New York, 1949. The image of this city is conceived in me, the tall, deep city which becomes the black city, scratched and clawed by neon, and so my paintings. New York, the face of the city, all a black mesh at night, confused, contorted, relieved by lost and wandering lights into which I made incisions as if to destroy it. The black city is seen from above, as a bird in flight. For this reason, its structure consists of a single mass, like a mesh, the mesh which weaves the block mass of the painting. It is not arbitrary, it cannot be otherwise. It is inevitable and only possible structure which corresponds, according to art's nature, to my steps, crisscrossing the city endlessly during the years of my life and with New York. The city doesn't have a personality, it is personality itself. I convey the architectural view through human emotions. Over the death of the black city, which I created, arose an orange moon. The moon which rose unconsciously from the depths of my spiritual need was to become, albeit in various forms, the symbol and search of my salvation, a star of Bethlehem. Now we're going to see some images of Venice. I went to Venice because its fantastic aspect of a city on the water, It offered escape from the materialistic world which, after the war, particularly disgusted me. Venice was all visual images like New York. They are both dreams of stone on the sea. One is vertical, the other is horizontal. But the parallelism is not a theory or an idea of mine. It is something that happens within me. Because I lived in Venice for 12 years, and for those 3 years I only made paintings of St. Mark's Square, the vertical corridor of the repeated suffering steps of our existence that flows into the glory and explosion of St. Mark's Basilica, as if on the screen of my paintings, the inchoate mass of the Black City now parted to form a corridor between the two palaces that flank the square with the white wedge of heat splitting it asunder. Leaping in the sky of sullied silver, the palaces on either side painted in clotted blood, perhaps too much, as one said. The orange moon that had risen above my fear-ridden vision of New York became the golden Basilica of St. Mark's, to which now I had access. No longer a disk as vague as a distant planet, but a haven into which I could enter. I did not realize why I was painting it. God knew it, because God is the gift I have within me. He had his own reasons, and that's enough for me. My way of painting was my love for it. Love was the energy making those paintings. If my life in New York and Venice had been the two places which were like a mother to me, in my life, New York and Venice have been the two places which were like a mother to me. For my fear and death are the fertile ground that gives rise to the redeeming sign. Colosseum. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over a few passages and show you this Colosseum, which I think most of you already know what it looks like now that we all travel the world. Wherever I see fear and death, that's the place where I immerse myself and get lost to become absorbed in the sign to which I have been prophetically called. Assisi. I think these are particularly beautiful, and they weren't shown in the film, so I'm going to read his excerpts. So that redeeming sign, Assisi, may emerge. I cannot be saved unless I save that place. Because all my life, everybody's life, is death and resurrection. And these are also quite beautiful. These are images of the Eiffel Tower. I always had the impression that no matter where I went, it was in the misery of the world that those paintings were born. Since art is a redeeming sign in itself, somehow I was saving those people. And by saving them, I was surely saving myself. The Sahara. In 1955, I went to the Sahara Desert, to the truth of the desert, eating away at the foundations of life that finally, after a few more scarred and vertebral protests, burst into dust to desert. One day, while I was walking barefoot in the desert, I found right in front of me an enormous footprint of a bare foot. I do not remember if it was connected to other steps or to another foot. It remained in me as a sign, a single enormous foot. I put my foot inside that footprint. It was like a gesture of prayer. I was praying. I did not know why I was doing it, yet I was obeying to an intimate internal impulse. Then I removed my foot and stopped thinking about it. 2 months later, I was in Paris when I painted a series of 35 paintings of the Sahara. At a certain point while I was working on this painting, I understood that something was missing, but I could not understand what it was. Without thinking, my hand stretched out, grabbed the canvas, and put it here on the floor. I removed my shoe and put my foot in it, precisely as I did in the sand in Africa. What does this mean? It means that I now gave back to the Arab his foot. I now returned the foot I had stolen from him, but at a price that he accepts Jesus Christ. The earth, the silence of things. Bassa is a soil that, like clay in the hands of the potter, is a body that awaits the imprint of man. In order to manifest itself as a work of nourishment, that is, food, during this process of manifesting itself as work, the soil passes through and takes on an infinite variety of colors. This is an image of winter, and shapes. An unceasing becoming that is an end. It has no stable form, no other goal to reach except that of becoming, which in turn is continually transformed in the growth of the person who eats it, while any moment or any phase of the earth's becoming is being painted. The image that arises must synthesize in an image all the phases of the eternal rotation of the earth. Here you really see how he's reducing things down even more. The burning fog. These are a series of images when he was living in Milan, and I'm going to skim through them and just read this. He really, after living in all those beautiful places, he didn't find the marshlands of Milan, sorry for those Milanese out there too, particularly inspiring, and he first referred to it as an ugly brown sponge, which was pretty funny. The fog. The fog has squeezed my pride, my hate for it, into love, itself void. It empties everything of its substance, both of body and of color. At this point, grace entered into to transfigure it into possibility, accessibility to loving it. Since no more as a point of arrival, but now silence as a point of departure, in which the fields emerge as an extension of silence that was already there in a world. It's the reverse in the usual dynamics. It is the silence of upside-down things, up to the things of silence. The fog in the hand of the gift was assigned to me the mortification of pride in things, in appearances, in my own flesh, so that the Spirit led me into an unknown path, hiding from me the beautiful things God revealed to me in the fog. Beautiful things. I think this is a particularly beautiful late series in his late style. If you look at the window of the fog, that is you inside of the fog, you will realize that it is not like a static wall, but it is a door. It is mobile. Well, wait a second here. It is a palpitating ferment of little points of light in color. Yellow, blue, violet, and pink, constantly billowing towards you to the point of spilling over the window frame. And on it spills over the orbit of your eyes, filled by now with tears of the fog, until you have the sensation of being the fog that cries in your eyes and not in the window in front of you. Now we can understand what it meant by seeing to the point of being seen. The fog puts to death every object, and all the objects rise in dense cloud. That is this face, the burning fog. The tree from nothingness. Nothing stands still. I think this actually really captures his approach to painting in his art and his tremendous understanding. Nothing stands still. Everything is moving, becoming an extension of the original creation. Even the desk, the chair where I'm writing from, breathe with my own breathing. In the same way, the tree changes, grows within my changing and my growing. I do not see the tree. I see the nothingness whence the tree is being born. This is the perfect description of ourselves. I am the tree. Abandonment. A month ago, I resumed painting. After 4 months, a month ago, I resumed painting. I spent 4 months without painting. It has been a great pain. Then someone brought me some pictures of Venezuela, of the coast, beautiful pictures that moved me and caused me to paint, starting from what the picture revealed, a ship abandoned for 40 years along the coast of Venezuela. If someone asks me why an abandoned ship, I say, I always paint what I am, not what I see, but what I am. If I made 14 paintings of the abandoned ship, it meant that inside me there is an abandonment of the ship. I am the abandoned ship. Abandoned means the supreme, ultimate companionship. It's not a lack of companionship. It's not. It's not a lack of companionship. It's the ultimate companionship. There is no companionship more beautiful than the so-called abandonment, because the abandonment means to abandon oneself in all that is convenient comfort. I did that since the first day I picked up the colors to paint. That was the beginning of my abandonment, of my companionship, my true companionship, because that was what God had decided. Because Christ is the ultimate companionship that accompanies the abandonment. He is the extreme companionship, the ultimate companionship, the total companionship. Painting is the expression and the image of this extreme companionship. And here's a photo of Don Giussani and William Congdon embracing, and I love this. He's saying adieu, but I would like to say he's saying hello, America. Thank you very much.
This coming February 22nd, the exhibit The Sabbath of History will open in New Haven, Connecticut. The exhibit, sponsored by the Knights of Columbus in collaboration with the William G. Congdon Foundation, will be at the Knights Museum and will remain open until September 16, 2012. The exhibit displays a collection of about 50 works of Congdon from museums and private collections in the United States and Europe, and documents the artist's entire creative journey from his origins in New York City to his final years near a monastery in the countryside of Lombardy in Italy. Alongside the artistic itinerary, the exhibit will present the meditations on Good Friday and Holy Saturday of the then Cardinal Ratzinger, now Pope Benedict XVI, which were already the subject of a published volume from whose title the exhibit was named. More information and pamphlets on this event will be available at the desk. And like Jane MILOSCH said, if you to see his paintings in person is a completely different experience than to see them in slides, so we highly recommend you attend this exhibit. We want to thank Jane MILOSCH very much for sharing her profound insights on William Congdon with us, and we have now 10 minutes before our next presentation. So we want to let you know that at 5:30, there's going to be a tremendously interesting presentation called Either We Depend on God or on Power, the Case of the Arab Spring, a discussion about the events in Arab countries and the role of religion in the fight for freedom, with Frank Anderson, former Chief, Near East Division, Director of Operations, CIA, and Wael Farouk, Professor of the Arabic Language Institute at the American University in Cairo. So we'll see you back here in 10 minutes. Thank you.